There is a version of this story where I was simply afraid of commitment, and where everything I did can be explained by cold feet and poor judgment and a lapse in loyalty that I should have been stronger than. That version is available, and I understand why people reach for it. The version I actually lived is more specific. I was 23 days from marrying the first person who had ever made me feel like a stable life was something I was allowed to have, and I chose. Not impulsively, not drunkenly, not in a moment I couldn't control, to spend a night with my ex-boyfriend in a hotel 2 train stops from our flat. I told myself it was closure. I told myself it was the last disordered thing I needed to do before I became someone who didn't need disorder anymore. What I could not tell myself, then or now with any confidence, is why I booked the hotel on the email account Theo used every morning to plan our wedding. My name is Amanda, and I am 31 years old, and I teach English literature to secondary school students who trust me with their worst first drafts and their most embarrassing interpretations of poetry, and I have always been good at making people feel that they are safe inside a conversation. I am warm when it matters and precise when it counts, and the version of myself that I present to classrooms and dinner parties, and both sets of family members, is a woman who has, against the odds of her upbringing, arranged herself into someone who deserves a good life. The key word in that sentence is arranged. I grew up inside my parents' marriage, which was volatile and repeatedly separating and finally over when I was 15. And I learned from it that good things are provisional, that calm is what comes before the rupture, and that the most you can do is manage yourself into the shape that causes the least damage on the way out. I am 23 days from marrying Theo Marsh, who is an architect and the best person I know, and the wedding has been planned correctly for 11 months. The venue, the photographer, the seating chart in its 3rd revision, the dress altered twice, the flowers confirmed in writing. Everything is correctly arranged. The living room coffee table has been occupied since January by venue contracts and supplier emails and the order of service mock-ups that smell, by now, of fresh printer paper and something that used to feel exciting. The navy notebook Theo gave me on our first date sits among the documents. He gave it because I mentioned once that I like to write things down. I have written in it weekly since, fragments, observations, questions I haven't answered. 4 days ago, I opened it to a clean page and wrote, "What am I actually afraid of?" I have not written an answer. I close the notebook when I hear him coming through the flat. The text from Dominic arrived on a Wednesday at 6:30, while I was marking essays at the kitchen table. He was passing through the city, wanted to say hello, was I free for coffee? Dominic and I dated for 2 years before Theo, and we have spoken occasionally since. Nothing significant, just the maintenance contact of 2 people who ended things without enough anger to make silence comfortable. I read the message 3 times. I told myself coffee was coffee. I told him yes, and I told Theo I had a staff meeting running late on Thursday, and I left a mug in the drying rack and went to the coffee shop near school and sat across from a man who asked me real questions for 90 minutes. He asked what I was reading, what I was afraid of, whether I thought marriage changed people or revealed them. I answered everything without editing. He disagreed with me about something and let us both sit in the disagreement without resolving it. I drove home with my hands on the wheel and a warm, wide feeling in my chest that I had not produced in several months, and I sat in the parking space outside the flat for 6 minutes before I went upstairs. 3 days later, I sent a text from a red light. Was he still around this week? He was. I booked a room at the Langham on the shared Gmail account we use for wedding coordination because my own phone was charging across the room and his laptop was open on the coffee table with the account already logged in, and I picked it up without thinking about what I was doing or where the confirmation would arrive. The booking was made. The confirmation went to the shared inbox at 7:43 p.m. I put the laptop down and went to make tea. I was already asleep when Theo's phone received it. The night itself was not what I had told myself it would be. I went because I needed to feel like a person who was still in motion, not yet decided, not yet permanently arranged into the shape of someone else's plan. What I found was a man who asked me real questions and then would be in Amsterdam on Thursday. And the warmth of the evening sat in my chest with a quality I couldn't name until much later, when naming it became the only thing left to do with it. The following morning, Theo was at the kitchen table when I came down. He was calm in the way of a man who has spent the night deciding how to hold something, and he asked me first whether there was anything I wanted to tell him before he asked something harder. He said he had been in the shared inbox looking for the Hadley Hall caterer email, and there was a hotel confirmation dated yesterday with my name on it and a check-in time of 7 in the evening. He asked where I had been. He asked it once, looking at the table, leaving the question open for whatever I wanted to put into it. He said that if something was wrong, if I was having doubts about any part of what we were building, he would rather hear it from me directly than any other way, and that the home we had spent 11 months planning still had room for an honest conversation if I was willing to have one. I told him I had been at Petra's, and the hotel must be from an old search, something auto-populated. I said this while my eyes filled, which was not strategic, but functioned as one. And the tears made the question feel cruel, and the cruelty made him pull back. He said sorry for asking. He went to the study. I stood at the counter until the coffee went cold, and understood, clearly and fully, what I had just done to a man who had asked me, with complete sincerity, to tell him the truth. I called Petra from the school corridor during my free period. She listened to everything. Then she said, "So I'm covering for you." It wasn't quite a question. I said I needed a few days to figure out what to do. She said okay, in the tone of a woman who has already decided this is the last time she will say it, and we both knew that okay was a temporary structure neither of us believed in. That evening, one of Theo's old university contacts, a woman I had met twice at firm events, sent a message to our shared wedding planning chat asking about the dietary requirements for the formal dinner table. She had been copied in on something months ago and had never been removed. She signed off with a cheerful note about how excited she was for us. I read it and then looked at the coffee table, at the seating chart and the venue contracts and the navy notebook sitting among them, and I closed the chat. The engagement dinner at Theo's parents' house was a formal occasion. 20 guests, both families, white tablecloths, the good glasses from the cabinet his mother only opens for events that matter. I wore the sapphire blue dress I had bought with Petra last spring, the one she said was the best colour on me, and I drove to the house thinking, get through tonight. The 8 days since the hotel had been managed carefully, divided into sections I moved through without examining the whole of them, and I arrived at the dinner with the particular composure of a person who has been performing composure long enough that it has started to feel like the real thing. The food was good and the conversation was easy in the way of evenings organised around happiness. Theo's father gave a short toast before dinner, warm, correctly funny, entirely right, and I watched Theo receive it and felt, for a moment, the specific grief of something you are still inside. His mother Ruth was at the far end of the table with her hands folded on the cloth and her eyes going between Theo and me in the quiet way of a woman who has been storing observations for 11 months and has not yet decided what to do with them. Halfway through the main course, someone mentioned the ceremony room at Hadley Hall, and Theo's sister asked what the light was like in the afternoon, and Theo described it: the stone floor, the south-facing windows, the way it would look in photographs. And he said, as he always does, that I was going to love it. He said it with certainty. He was probably right, and the statement settled over me with the weight of something that has been settled too many times, and I picked up my wine glass, and when the conversation moved and someone asked whether we had prepared any remarks for the ceremony itself, I stood up. I had not planned the toast. I told myself later that this made it different, that an unplanned thing is closer to the truth. What I said began correctly. Theo was the best person I knew. I was not accustomed to things going right. For most of my adult life, I had understood happiness as something provisional. I meant to stop there. I continued. I said I didn't always know if I deserved this. I said I thought that was probably normal. I said I was learning to believe I did. I said it to the room, with the specific fluency of an English teacher who has stood in front of audiences for 9 years, and the room listened with the particular attention of people who are hearing something that is not entirely what they expected to hear. 2 people at the far end exchanged a glance. Ruth set her glass down without sound. Theo's sister looked at the tablecloth. Theo's father said, "Here, here," and raised his glass because someone had to, and the toast was over, and I sat down, and the dinner continued at a slightly different register than before. I was aware of the navy notebook in my bag throughout. It had been there since I left the flat, sitting at the bottom with the unanswered question inside it, and during the toast, I was aware of it the way you are aware of a thing you meant to do and did not. Theo came to find me in the kitchen when I went for water. He stood in the doorway and said, quietly, that he wanted to talk properly when they got home. Not now, not here, but when they got home. He said it with the specific composure of a man who has made a decision about his composure and is applying it as precisely as he applies everything. He was not asking a question. He was stating a fact about what would happen next, in the way he states everything. And in another month I might have found this frustrating. Tonight it was the most frightening thing in the room. In the car on the way home he said nothing for 15 minutes, except to ask once whether I was cold. I said no. The streetlights passed. I thought about the notebook in my bag and the question I had written 3 weeks ago and the word "this" I had written below it on the balcony, and I thought about the hotel lobby and the specific quality of Dominic's warmth, and I thought about the seating chart on the coffee table and the 16 notes pressed flat in the back of the notebook, and I did not think about any of these things for long enough to arrive anywhere useful. The following morning Ruth called Theo at 9:15. I heard him pick up in the study. The call was 12 minutes. He came to the kitchen afterward and said his mother had called, and he said it while looking at the coffee maker rather than at me. And in the gap between that sentence and his next breath, I understood that Ruth had said something more than the toast was lovely, and that what she had said was something she had been storing for 11 months, and that she had decided the dinner was the occasion to say it. Anwen called the morning after the dinner, because mothers do, and she arrived at her own house with the tea already made by the time I got there on Tuesday. And she sat across from me in the sitting room and said she wanted to tell me something she wished someone had told her before each of her own marriages. She said that the fear doesn't mean you're making a mistake, but it also doesn't mean you're not. She said the problem is that fear looks exactly the same whether you're about to do the right thing or the wrong one, and the only difference is what you do with it. She said this with the authority of 3 marriages and 2 divorces, and 1 current husband she is genuinely happy with. She said, "Whatever you're carrying, it's making you smaller." She said it and poured more tea and didn't ask what the carrying was. She didn't ask and I didn't offer, and the space between us held both of those decisions without collapsing. Anwen has always understood that there is a difference between silence that withholds and silence that makes room, and the silence she gave me on Tuesday was the second kind. A cleared surface, an open door she was not going to walk through on my behalf. I sat with my tea and I looked at her hands, which are older than the rest of her and always have been, the knuckles prominent, the rings she still wears from all 3 marriages stacked on the same finger because she says removing them would be revisionist, and she is not a revisionist, she is an accumulator. I looked at her hands and I thought about the word smaller, and I thought about the 3 marriages, and I wondered whether she had been small inside any of them, whether the carrying she was referring to was something she recognized because she had done it herself, compressed herself around a secret or a shame or a wanting that did not fit the shape of the life she was publicly building. And I wondered this, but I did not ask, because the asking would have required me to explain why I was asking, and I was not ready to explain, and she knew I was not ready, and the tea was good, and the sitting room was warm, and I stayed for another 30 minutes talking about nothing and letting the word smaller settle into the place it was going to live. I drove home with the words smaller in my chest and didn't know where to put it. Theo was at the kitchen table when I got home, with the seating chart in front of him and a pen that had not been used. His jacket was still on, which he never does. He changes when he gets home without exception. And he was looking at the chart with the expression of a man who is not thinking about it, not thinking about anything except the thing underneath everything else. I saw him from the hallway before he saw me. His shoulders were dropped in the way I have seen once before, at his father's funeral, when he was not managing what was on his face. I stood there for 8 seconds. I went to the kitchen and asked him what he wanted for dinner. He looked up, adjusted, said whatever was easiest. I told myself he was overwhelmed by the logistics. I told myself this with precision and made pasta, and we ate it, and neither of us said anything that mattered. We ate the pasta at the kitchen table with the seating chart relocated to the counter, and I watched him eat the way I have watched him eat hundreds of times, and the familiarity of it, the particular way he holds his fork, the pause between bites where he sets it down and reaches for his glass, the order in which he finishes things on the plate, always the vegetables first, then the pasta, then whatever remains. The familiarity of it was not comforting. It was evidentiary. It was the accumulated record of 1,000 unremarkable meals, proving that I knew this man thoroughly, that I had studied him without intending to, that the knowledge had arrived through proximity and repetition and the slow, unconscious absorption that happens when you share a life with someone, and that all of this knowledge, all of this evidence of care, was now arranged alongside the thing I had done, and the two could not be reconciled, and the fork going down between bites was the same fork, and the hand holding it was the same hand, and the man was the same man, and I was not the same woman, and the pasta was fine. And we did not speak. On Sunday, I told him I needed to be honest about something. I said I had been struggling with anxiety about the wedding, not about marrying him specifically, but about the scale of it, the public nature, the feeling of a life being observed rather than lived. I said the toast had been the result of this, and that I regretted the way it came out, and that perhaps scaling back the guest list might help both of us feel less pressured. I said all of this carefully, with the specific fluency of something prepared, and Theo listened and asked whether the anxiety was about the ceremony specifically or something larger. I said just the ceremony. He said he understood and he would make some calls about the guest list, and he took out his phone and started a note. He was doing the thing he always does, receiving information and organising it, building a response before checking whether the information was complete. And I watched him do it, and understood that I had bought, at most, a week. That evening I opened the shared Gmail inbox to delete the hotel confirmation before he looked at it again. The email was gone from the inbox. I searched, not in trash, not in spam. I opened the sent folder on the shared account and looked at the forwarding activity. The confirmation had been forwarded to an address I didn't recognise, t.marsh.private@gmail.com. A private account I didn't know existed. He had forwarded the email to himself the morning he found it, which meant he had known for 8 days, which meant the Sunday conversation about anxiety was a conversation he let me have while holding the complete information. I sat at the coffee table for 11 minutes without moving. 11 minutes is not a long time. It is also long enough to understand several things in sequence. First, that the week I thought I had bought on Sunday did not exist and had never existed, because the purchase had been made from someone who already held the currency and was allowing me to believe the transaction was real. Second, that Theo's question, whether the anxiety was about the ceremony specifically or something larger, was not a question. It was an opening. It was a door held ajar, a chance offered, a moment in which he had paused the organising and the note-taking and had looked at me and had asked me, with the only directness available to a man who has already found the answer, whether I wanted to give him the truth myself. I had said just the ceremony. I had closed the door he opened. I had chosen the partial version, the managed version, the version that fit inside the anxiety narrative. And he had let me choose it and had gone back to his phone and had made his note and had not pressed further. Third, that the private email address t.marsh.private was not new. A Gmail address is not created in response to a single forwarded email. A Gmail address exists because it was created at some prior point for some prior reason, and the reason was privacy, and the privacy was from me, and this meant there were other things in that inbox, other pieces of a private interior I had not been invited to see, and I could not object to this because I had my own private interiors, my own unseen spaces, my own architecture of concealment, and the symmetry was exact, and it was unbearable. Petra's text came on Monday evening. He called me. She called back immediately when I rang and answered on the second ring. Her voice had the quality of a decision already made. She said he had asked her one question directly, and she had answered it honestly, and she was sorry but she had been carrying the covering for 3 weeks and she couldn't carry it any further. She said she had told him everything she knew, the calls she'd fielded from me the morning after, the Petra's alibi she had confirmed, the fact that she'd known the hotel night was coming before it came. She said, "I'm sorry." She meant it. I said, "Okay." I said it in the tone of someone who has been bracing for an impact and is now assessing the shape of it. The following morning, the venue contracts and financial documents were gone from the coffee table. Not quietly. He simply carried them to the study and closed the door, at 7 in the morning, before I came downstairs. The coffee table was clear. The navy notebook was still on it. He had left it. I stood at the bottom of the stairs looking at the empty surface and understood that the leaving of the notebook and the taking of the documents were the same message, stated once, in 2 different languages. On Tuesday morning, I told Theo I had a staff briefing and drove to the Langham instead. I went to the lobby and asked the desk to let Dominic know I was downstairs. I waited in the lobby with the desk clerk 3 feet away and understood, standing there, that I had chosen to do this in daylight with a witness present because some part of me needed the choice to be documented, needed it to be a thing I had done intentionally rather than something that had happened to me. Dominic came down. He was warm and glad to see me. I asked him directly whether the night had meant anything to him. He looked at me with genuine care and said it had been wonderful to see me, and he hoped I figured out what I wanted. He said he was leaving for Amsterdam on Thursday. He said it with real kindness, and I stood in the lobby after he went back upstairs and held the specific hollow quality of kindness from a person who will not remember the hotel's name in 6 months. I sat in the car outside the flat for 9 minutes after I drove home. I thought about what Anwen had said. The fear looks the same whether you're doing the right thing or the wrong one. I understood now which category this had been. I went upstairs. Theo was in the living room. He had taken the morning off work, which he has never done without specific reason. He was not in his chair. He was on the sofa, which is his version of being less defended, and the navy notebook was on the coffee table between us. He said my name. He said he had been looking at this for 2 days and he wanted to have the conversation once, cleanly, and then he would know what to do with what he heard. He said he had the hotel confirmations saved to his private account. He said Petra had told him everything she knew 3 days ago. He said the date, the hotel name, the booking name on the reservation. He asked one question. Was there anything he should understand about why? Because he was willing to try to understand it before he made the decisions he was going to make regardless. He said he had not been asking the right questions for months, that he had been building rather than asking, stating rather than checking. And he knew this, and he was naming it, and he was still sitting across from her and asking her to tell him something real. He said if she could tell him honestly what she was afraid of, he would go to couples therapy for as long as it took. He said it with the steadiness of a man who has located the stillness in himself specifically for this conversation. I said I appreciated that he was identifying his failures now. I said the conversation I had needed about what the engagement was becoming, about whether I could find him inside all the arrangements, had not been available until the evidence of the hotel was in his inbox. I said I had tried to tell him at the dinner. I said I had been trying for months in the only language I had available, which was performing fine, until performing fine produced a toast in front of both families that said something true I couldn't say directly. I said the problem was that the conversation he was now offering had required the hotel to make it possible, and that the timing was not nothing, that arriving with openness after the evidence arrived was a different thing from arriving before it. I said this with clarity, and I meant every word, and the argument was largely true, and what I did not say was the true thing underneath it, that I would have found an exit from this regardless, because I have never stayed inside something good past the 8-month mark without introducing the end of it, and the hotel was month 8 of the engagement, and I crossed the calendar date with the specific accuracy of a person following a pattern they have never broken. He listened to all of it without interrupting. When I finished, he said he was going to handle what came next properly and carefully. He said it once, standing in the living room with the notebook on the table and the empty surface where the documents used to be. He went to the bedroom. She heard the wardrobe, the overnight bag zipper, the bathroom, the footsteps, the front door closing with a quietness that was deliberate, the specific quietness of a person who has said everything they planned to say and is now moving to the next thing. I sat in the living room with the notebook in my hands. The understanding arrived in a shape I couldn't organize into anything useful. I had not burned the engagement because I didn't deserve Theo. I had burned it because I had never learned to stay inside the good thing long enough to find out whether I did. And those are different diagnoses. And the second one has a treatment, and I had destroyed the relationship in which the treatment was available. I held this for 30 seconds before I went to make tea I didn't drink. The notebook was still on the table. The coffee table was otherwise clear. His text arrived at 8 that evening. The walk-through appointment at Hadley Hall was Wednesday at 11. He said she should still go, that there were things to discuss about the booking. He said he would be there. He said it in the neutral tone of a calendar confirmation, which was the most frightening tone he had used in the entire story. I arrived at Hadley Hall at 11:05 on a Wednesday. The consultation room was on the ground floor. A long table, 2 windows looking out over the ceremony grounds, the faint sound of someone setting up chairs next door. The venue coordinator, Helen, was already inside when I got there. She greeted me, said Theo was already in the room, excused herself, and pulled the door closed behind her. Theo was seated at the far end of the table. On the table in front of me were 2 things, the navy notebook and a sealed envelope with my name on it in his handwriting. He said Helen had given them the room for a few minutes. He slid the envelope across the table and said I should read it before we talked. The letter inside was from a solicitor firm. A formal notice dissolving the engagement and all financial arrangements associated with it. It itemized the engagement ring by description and current valuation, £4,200, and required its return within 14 days by recorded delivery. It noted that the joint wedding account, from which the hotel booking had been charged on the night in question, had been partially funded by his contribution of £3,800 toward the venue deposit. This amount was identified as subject to civil recovery. A 14-day response deadline. No wedding. Only the letter, the amounts, and the date. I read it twice. I looked at the notebook, my notebook, which he had brought here and placed on the table without explanation and left there for me to find. I looked at him. He said he was sorry for how this was going. He said he was not sorry for what the letter required. He said he had wanted to give it to me here, in a room that was supposed to mean something, rather than by post. He said this without cruelty, and then he knocked on the consultation room door for Helen, thanked her specifically for the room, and walked out through the main entrance. The gravel outside made the sound of someone who knows where they are going. I sat at the table alone. The internal contradiction arrived without announcement. I had believed the night gave me back the feeling of being in motion, of being a person who had not yet been decided. What it gave me was a solicitor's letter in a wedding venue and a notebook on a table, and a man who knew how to leave a room properly. Closure snapshot. The ring travelled by recorded delivery inside a padded envelope within the 14-day window without a note. Petra called twice in the first week and I answered both times. By the third week we were speaking normally, which is not the same as before, but it is something real. Dominic sent a message from Amsterdam 2 weeks later saying he was sorry for how things had turned out. I read it and didn't reply because there was nothing left to confirm and nothing left to ask. I moved into my colleague Simone's spare room and put the Navy notebook on the windowsill, and 6 weeks later I found a rental and moved the notebook there. I returned to the classroom after a week's personal leave and marked 32 essays over 2 evenings and was told by a student at the end of a unit that I was the best teacher she had ever had. And I read the card in an empty room at 4 in the afternoon and felt the particular quality of the professional self intact while the rest of the architecture is being rebuilt from foundations. The notebook is on the windowsill. I open it sometimes to the back pages where his notes are pressed flat. All 16 of them, still there, because he left them for me. He did not take them when he took everything else, and I have thought about that often, in the spare room and now in the rental. And I think I will be thinking about it for a long time yet.